So our next panel is going to be wearable tech, past, present, and future. And we have Syuzi Pakhchyan, who is the design director at BCG Digital Ventures. Kathleen McCarthy, head curator of Museum Science and Industry. Madison Maxey, founder and CEO of LOOMIA. And Mark Ronay, CEO of Liquid Wire.
We created an exhibit around wearable tech because we think it's an important part in our history right now. And that's why it's important to encapsulate that in an experience that is tangible and real and inspiring the next generation of people to think about what's possible.
It's art, it's science, it's technology, it's fashion, it might be architecture or other kinds of design. And so I think having it here at MSI is perfect.
Fashion has proven to be a transdisciplinary intersection point for technology and design, unlike most other fields.
I love that we all have a voice into manifesting a potential future.
I think that it has the potential to impact our lives in lots of ways we are really only beginning to understand.
It is really about the things that we can become, or that we can do, or that we can imagine as a result of being given access to technology or becoming a creator of that technology.
Yeah, we've been working with the entire museum. This is really a collaborative effort across all divisions and all departments to bring this to life.
We are bringing new voices to the table. We're combining them in fresh ways, and I think it's producing work that is truly unlike things we've seen before.
We work together to start with blue sky concept from what we really want to teach the guests about the exhibit, and we sketch and we research and we benchmark and we talk to the designers and experts in the field, and that helps us refine how we want to tell the story.
It's an incredible opportunity for the museum to collaborate with outside partners because it allows us to really bring that creative experience to our guests in a very first-hand kind of way.
It's an environment where an idea can come to fruition in a moment.
I knew that I was very much fascinated by a color-changing quality of hummingbirds. And from that point onwards, I was making prototypes, changing the design, and that was a very interesting journey.
We had like a team of like 20 people sitting around hand stitching because there's a lot of craftsmanship in this, like the past working together with the future.
It's quite a nice validation that we're part of a wearables exhibition. So it's brilliant, it's very humbling to be part of this amazing display.
I'm excited to see how female young generation would perceive this, because I think it's very important for them to stretch their imagination.
I think it's really cool to see all the other creators of all these cool technologies and designs. It's really inspiring, and it's definitely making me think about like some technologies and how I could possibly use it in inventions that I might want to make.
I'm excited by the notion that we're democratizing this technology.
I love the mission because it goes all the way back to the very beginning of who we are. We're challenging ourselves to deliver the mission in new ways, and I think that's what the world requires of us right now.
What a phenomenal and exciting exhibit. So if you guys are in Chicago, it's at the Museum of Science and Industry. Please definitely drop by. So hello everybody, my name again is Syuzi Pakhchyan. I'm really excited to be here to moderate this panel on the past, present, and future of wearable technology. I have the privilege of being with some of the most trailblazing entrepreneurs today in the space that are actually looking at the second gen of what these wearables can be. And of course, Kathleen here, who has worked really hard in curating this phenomenal exhibition. It's the first of its kind on wearable technology that not only looks at what the potential futures are for wearables, but also what are the implications in our day-to-day lives. So thank you and welcome to this panel. What we're going to cover today, one, is we're going to take a quick and brief look at sort of the past and try to understand what were some of the obstacles that we've had to overcome in order to even get us here, and more importantly, in order to push through, in order to get us to this amazing potential future that we just saw. Secondly, what we want to cover is some of the better understanding of some of the drivers currently in the industry that are really pushing the technology and even the cultural drivers forward. And lastly, I would love to conclude by getting everyone's point of view on what they see as the potential for wearables. So to begin, Madison and Mark, you guys have both been really working on the second generation of wearables. I mean, the first gen, last decade, we've kind of seen a bunch of wearables that were mostly on our wrist, wearables such as activity trackers such as a Fitbit, even smartwatches that barely, now they're starting to go beyond fitness, a little bit more into the realm of maybe productivity and entertainment. But you guys are working on something quite different. You're trying to get wearables into flexible substrates, wearables that are dynamic and potentially even expressive. Can you guys talk about some of the challenges you've had to overcome just to get yourself to where you are today?
Yeah, I can open up. So I think the main drive right now is integration into textile. And when doing that, I think the main difficulty has been hardware. People don't like putting copper wires into a textile. It doesn't work well. And you wind up working with folks who are really good at design, really good at textile manufacture, working with these things, don't have a really strong understanding of the electronics behind it. And so that gap, I think, you hear about this over and over again, this cross-disciplinary, cross-industry collaboration. That is the biggest hurdle, is cross-educating both electronic engineers on what is needed for apparel and the apparel folks for what's technically necessary to make their vision come true. That's what I've seen.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I feel like because there's so much translation that has to happen, these projects take a long time and they're very expensive, and so I think especially for startups in the space, part of the challenge is the funding to continue to do this kind of development. I think that if someone gave a group of small companies working in the space a large sum to just solve the problems in a few years, they would be solved between the mechanics of operations, plus the research and development, plus managing the customer's expectations, plus trying to translate between industries. It just really extends the timeline for the space.
Yeah, I think building off that, that's for the consumer applications, the obvious partners are the large apparel brands, and even smaller, more innovative apparel brands. They're used to working in textile space, which is very low budget, essentially free. So if you are making, say, a new shoe or a new sweater, and you're a major brand, your expectation is that a contract manufacturer or designer will produce you a garment for at most a couple $100s. And once you start putting electronics in there, you're talking about perhaps a 6-month-long project period for 6 figures or more. That's a hurdle, I think, just mentally for those companies to get through, which is why I think we've wound up steering a little more towards medical space where these project budgets are tolerated or seen as necessary. Yeah.
Great. And Kathleen, you have had the luxury of working with some of the really amazing innovators in the space, and also the luxury of actually hearing some of the conversations of people coming to the museum and enjoying the pieces that are there. What do you think are some of the cultural barriers, per se, of getting wearables into, adopted on a much more of a mass scale?
I think one of the biggest challenges is that it's hard for people to understand really the fundamental shift that's going to take place in our clothing, in the not too distant future, mostly because of the really groundbreaking fundamental work that Mark and Maddie are doing. And so we do a lot of interaction with our community. People look to us to tell them about the future. They look to us to, understand how science and technology are really relevant in their life, and especially if they have kids, what careers to kind of take. And so when we talk to focus groups and that, which we do on a regular basis, just to kind of keep our hand on the pulse, when we talked about wearable tech that goes beyond the familiar, we're used to strapping monitoring devices on our bodies and then looking at our phone. But to tell them that their clothes were going to be fundamentally different, we kind of got a collective like, huh? What? You know, and honestly, to be completely transparent, we believed in this topic, but we were having the same problem ourselves. I think because our clothing is so familiar, it was hard to understand that it could be so different in the not too distant future. When I'm collecting new technologies for the museum, I think of something Henry Ford said. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, because it's really hard to look ahead to something new. So, but the real shift came about when we started talking about some of the garments we wanted to put in. One of the items is called the holy dress, and it has a hacked lie detector in it. And so if you're wearing it and you tell a lie, it's got all the biometric sensors you would imagine in good performance sports apparel, but it gives the wearer an electric shock. And so people were like, why would I want to wear that? And then I'd say, well, would you want the person you're talking to be wearing that? And they're like, oh. So it's been one of the harder things to kind of organize. We really want to give people an introduction to the possibility, but people that come through are just amazed. Even the local reporters who cover museums came the first time without even a cameraman. He just thought, well, I have to go see this, I'm obligated, but yeah. And he came back and he put out his list of top 10 exhibits in Chicago in December, and we made that list.
Excellent, congratulations.
Thanks.
So there has been the rise and fall of wearables and enthusiasm for wearables, at least from the VC perspective and the industry. A lot of these wearables, as you, Kathleen, mentioned, some of them were a little too abstracted. It didn't quite capture individuals' imagination. Some of them just fell flat on the promise. Some of them were more business problems. They either didn't find product market fit, or they just couldn't figure out a viable way to scale some of these businesses. So let's just begin about, you kind of mentioned it earlier from your point of view, but what are some of the primary drivers pushing the industry forward today? And then we'll kind of circle back and try and understand the market a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the obvious thing that they tell you in startups, but I feel like it doesn't settle in until you experience those barriers, is that it's just very need-driven. And so I think, at least for a lot of our customers, they kind of have to go through this process of being like, we tried using flex PCBs, we tried using standard PCBs, like we tried wires and it didn't work. So now we're like excited and committed enough to start using these new kind of soft circuit technologies that can support wearable technologies, but also other kinds of unusual circuitry form factors. So yeah, it's definitely need, and I think that there's another perspective to viewing this space, where when we talk about wearable technology, it's often the final use case, the final product. But I think a lot of what we're working on are these building blocks to make that product. And so when you think of it as, you're selling a soft circuit to an engineer who normally uses a hard circuit to solve a problem, I think that's a really different thing than thinking of it as we're trying to give wearable tech to consumers, which is a much harder industry to understand. That's a much harder business problem to understand, I think.
Yeah, at the end of the day, some product designer is going to figure out what the killer app for a consumer is, and it's definitely not going to be me. Likewise, providing building blocks where, trying to put electronics in clothes is nothing new. People have been doing it for decades, and it's not gotten out to the market because the hardware solutions have been very clunky or prone to breaking. If you put a shirt in a wash 50 times, it might be tolerable to have a small hole somewhere in it or have the fabric fade out, but electronics is kind of a binary thing. That wear is a non-functional shirt. So that's been the holdup. I think it's going to continue to be a holdup in consumer apparel, but I see the main driver is entirely medical. This is where we raise investment from. This is where people are willing to put down serious R&D budgets. And this is where there's a really clearly defined need. Things like wearable medical patches that accumulate data over the course of weeks. I think you don't need much imagination to see why that's useful. Whereas for some of these consumer-driven applications, you need quite a good imagination, and you need to be able to sell that through to the end audience. And I don't have that identified. We're a technology company primarily. Yeah.
So when you guys are selling these building blocks to the businesses or the brands that you work with, can you talk a little bit about the collaboration process, and also how do you explain or inspire the end designer or the brand to like do something with this, right?
Yeah, so the brands want to do it already. They want to do it for the same price they can do regular clothing, and in similar volumes. That's the difficult part, and then nobody quite understands who's going to manufacture this is the other problem. Textile manufacturing is really well established, really efficient. I mean, we produce 150 billion pieces of textile apparel every year, so it's enormous. None of these people are electronics assembly folks. So that's a big hurdle, again, with the branded apparel segment. Medical device makers, completely the opposite. They're trying to borrow from apparel world, not drop prices necessarily, but improve comfort and fit. And that's where we're going to get the pull through initially. There's just, to me, no question. And that will be followed almost certainly by workwear, again, where the good business case for spending $300, $400, or $500 on a piece of apparel that will then either increase productivity or lower insurance costs. So you need these really obvious drivers until someone clever comes up with something that none of us are imagining right now. Yeah.
I completely agree. I feel like you've been through a lot. You've seen a lot of the same things.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of something interesting about that is that it becomes, you mentioned how do we inspire the customer, how do we collaborate with them? I think that as you start to get into this side of the work, it actually becomes very dry. Like there's not a lot of inspiration. It's kind of just like, can you meet this spec? Can it perform this way? And we'll do some creative problem solving together, but it's kind of interesting to see how, we distill down from so much of the excitement happening, like on the most innovative front to kind of this like dry specs following to, feed some of these more industrial customers.
Yeah, and to the specs, I mean, people are building electronic apparel right now. It's a niche. So you can find, for example, very high-end EMS suits to electromuscular stimulation that make your muscles twitch, that aid in athletic recovery. These things retail for a couple $1,000s for a full body suit, and they're used mostly by professional athletes. So those things exist, and we have partnered with manufacturers, so these kind of lower volume, high value niche applications. The question to see is will that translate out to these eye-popping numbers, the 150 billion units that we see from standard apparel, or some fraction of that? And that's the open question. That's a big lift over the next 10 years. Yeah.
And Kathleen, with all the work that you saw go through your exhibit, did you see any trends, any signals, anything that we need to pay attention to that could potentially spark a larger idea? Because it sounds like where there's a lot of energy in niche markets, there's obviously a potential in healthcare, but the mass adoption, the mass consumer isn't either there yet. Do you think that's a mental shift that needs to happen?
Yeah, and I think that what is really exciting for us is to participate in this sort of ecosystem. I mean, to work with like Maddie and Mark and help the public understand this possibility, and to really prepare them for this. So the exhibit has a wide range of things that are actually out on the market now, but are maybe just a little less familiar. So people are very aware of smartwatches, Fitbits, and things like that. So we went a little bit for more unusual things. We had to pull a few things right out of Kickstarter, like beg people to release things to us early, so that when people come to the museum, it's a complex decision in that if you could go to a store and see the same thing and not pay an entry fee and get to try it on versus come to a museum. We did have somebody try and take a Garmin off and try it on, but so what we try to do is show them where their world is at right now with some of these consumer goods, to show them a little bit what's coming near term, and then to really excite the possibility of it. Because with all the problems that Maddie and Mark are identifying with getting these things to market and to scale, right now the garments that are in our exhibit are more one-offs. They're collaborations between fashion designers and tech people. Intel was a big sponsor of garment technology for a while. But we want people to really imagine and kind of clamor for it and help drive that. And so if we can be that part of the ecosystem that connects the public with this new technology, that's a really happy space for us to be in.
Great. And then how do people or other designers and companies find you guys? Like, how do they reach out to you? Or how is that exchange, that communication happening, right? I don't know what I don't know. Right?
Yeah. And obviously we have a sales team and we go to conferences and whatnot, but what we really do is we coast behind failed technologies. So folks who have been trying to use silver inks that are really just not appropriate for textile applications or flexible stretch applications, or people have been using metallized yarns and the like, and these things don't work for various really kind of nuts and bolts reasons, or they're very clunky, or you wind up having to stabilize them to such a degree with layers and layers of seam tapes and plastics that the garment becomes kind of stiff and uncomfortable. Those people are always looking for new solutions. There's R&D groups inside existing apparel brands, and they actively hunt. And so if you have something that differentiates you, you will get an engagement. And if that engagement is successful, so far we've had, well, now we have a number of products in development, which obviously you can't talk about, but they may or may not come out in the next 3 to 5 years, and that's going to be exciting if they hit. Yeah. Yeah.
What's been your experience?
That's really interesting. I mean, I think we've taken a slightly more design route, like having our materials and materials libraries like Material Connection. Also, recommendations from innovation agencies really help as well. So, we'll find that, let's say an innovation agency is trying to source for a large company who wants to try and solve a specific problem. We'll try and have those relationships so that they have samples and they can recommend us if they think that we're a good fit, which can also kind of help with that translation. We try and be in relevant publications and things like that. We haven't done the a conference booth thing as much, but maybe someday soon. But yeah, it's really, I think that's something that's challenging, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts too. It's just that a lot of times we don't know what a company's specific problem is, so outbound can be tricky, so we try and make ourselves findable for the appropriate inbound.
Yeah, I think that is an advantage of working in apparel spaces. Electronics is all about performance and how fast is it, what's it do. In apparel, it's about hand feel and what materials you're using. These people are used to scouting out a huge library of different materials, and so I think that's kind of an advantage entering this space. Is there's not going to be any one single solution, and there is a lot of trial and failure and willingness to attempt innovation. The hard part is just convincing them that actually, it does cost this much to do this engineered system. And that's just getting in correctly with the engineering group, creating prototypes and building up the project. And where we're located in Portland, this is relatively easy to do because it's an R&D center for a lot of soft goods. But translating that into a full product run again is going to be the major challenge, because at the end of the day, the brand can be happy with the prototype and you can make almost anything spectacular if you're hand making it. But to get it into a contract manufacturer, which is inevitably going to be in South Asia or East Asia, and get the volumes out, that's where you really need to sell that contract manufacturer that you have a scalable process. And that's a bit of a chicken and egg problem.
Is that a role that the brand is playing, or that you are playing in terms of figuring out how to manufacture this product at scale? Or is that
we do both.
You do both.
Yeah, that's what we found is the brands would be happy to see the prototype and they would immediately ask, what's our contract manufacturer relationship? Or can you work with these people, can you work with those people? And there are contract manufacturers out there who really do put a lot of resources in trying to make e-textiles or smart clothing. MAS in Sri Lanka comes to mind as probably the most tech forward. And then in Europe, there's still quite an industry for niche apparel fabrication. So that's where we do a lot of business as well. And that is a tricky thing. The United States is focused on, at electronics manufacturer over apparel manufacturer because it's not seen as value added. And so I wind up on an airplane quite a lot. Yeah.
Have you had a similar experience, Madison?
Yeah, but when you mentioned Europe seems to have a very different appetite for this kind of development, which is great. Like as long as somebody has an appetite, that's great. So, you know, in terms of attracting and working with the right customers, just kind of finding those little pockets where companies are trying to push for something in the industry is really helpful. Like we start to build an intuition where it's like, oh, this is coming from Germany. It probably is like, you know, they probably have some budget. They're not going to expect it to be free. Versus this is coming from like a startup apparel company in New York. They definitely have no budget and they don't think, they don't know what to expect. So it's also like understanding what silos customers fall into.
Yeah. And for the inventors that were part of your exhibit, how do they fund or how do they, I guess, produce their work that was typically done?
Yeah, well, it's interesting to just hear about Europe because a lot of the individual garments in our exhibit came from Europe. There's some of the garments in there were people that sort of came out of, Philips used to do a lot of research in this area a decade or so ago, and so that's where a lot of people got their start. And then Intel has kind of stepped in and now already stepped away as well. But the others are really just people who have tech backgrounds, and this is an exploration of their actual personal connection to technology. So the garments that we have in the exhibit, because our title is Science and Industry, the fashion pieces we have in the exhibit are, we don't talk about aesthetics at all, not that they're not present, but all the garments really are about using technology in between human communication in various form or another. Some of the things have biometric sensors, so the garment is communicating to the person across from you what you're feeling or thinking. Like we already talked about the holy dress giving you an electric shock. So when you're talking to somebody, you know they're telling the truth. The piece in the video that had the little hummingbird-based collar, that has a camera in it, and so it's reading the emotion of the person in front of it, and it moves accordingly. If you're happy, the garment reacts one way, and if you're angry or sad, it reacts in different ways. So in those kind of people are really, they're coming out of a tech background, partnering with designers to really further explore this fundamental difference. I mean, our lives revolve around technology right now, but through devices. And soon it's going to be the opposite. We're going to be encapsulated in a device. We are going to be the center of a device. It's almost cyborgian, except for we always have to have limits in an exhibit, filters for the content, and skin was the filter. The next one might be slightly different, but we're going to encapsulate ourselves in technology, and we're giving agency to our clothing, like that dress that allows you to get an electric shock. There's also a wearable defibrillator that will give you an electric shock. Completely different tech, same outcome for different reasons, And so these projects are kind of maybe less focused on getting things to market, but I think that they are the things that will create in people's imagination the desire to then seek out people working with your materials to create new things. So.
Well, that's a wonderful, I think, segue to my last question before I take some questions from the audience. And this is for all of you. What is your vision for the incredible creative possibilities for wearables? What I'm actually really interested in is what is your wildest prediction, right? And where this industry is headed? And let's give it a time frame of the next 5 years and not, in the next 20. So it'll be somewhat near future.
I think nobody finds it that engaging, but I would just love if everybody's jacket could be a heated jacket. I feel like that would be a big step for us. It would be very comfortable. And I feel like there are so many pieces that need to come together for the industry and for consumer adoption to take that on. that if we could take it on, it would create a pathway for a lot of other exciting products. So I think that's my exciting
So do you think that's the heated jacket is a Trojan horse to getting individuals, to getting basically electronic garments in someone's closet?
I really think so. I mean, it's such a visceral, emotional feeling, and everybody hates the cold. I've never heard anyone say, I just love when I'm freezing, especially for people who travel a lot. You know, you're always trying to predict the new environment. Being able to have some control over that is really useful. And it's something that can be made, I think, more affordable than some medical or healthcare applications that also a wide group of people just don't care that much about to a certain extent. Like, there's a group of people who need the healthcare applications, and there's funding and development for them, and they need to exist. But I think for most of us, you know, we might not be ready, like we might not need those yet. And so just something that's generically applicable is very interesting to me. So.
Yeah, I can't disagree that heating and dynamic lighting are going to be the two things that get into consumer apparel first. And they're relatively simple. A very clear need, or people always want to be warm, and we see this pull a lot. But I know we focus on the consumer side of electronics, but I wouldn't discount the medical part. I think smart orthopedics will really change the way physical therapy is done. This is a major area, and geriatric care. And in the next 5 years, that's kind of my wildest dream, is to see most knee braces, elbow braces, and the like be enabled with temperature sensors, swell sensors, and bend sensors, so you can do these kinds of physical therapy activities remotely and on a continuous basis. Not that wild, but exciting. Yeah, 5 years isn't really enough to get way out there, I think. Yeah.
Great. What about you, Kathleen?
Well, something that Mark just said, it reminds me of a lot of the conversations we had when we were first thinking about this exhibit, is that now that we have clothing that can collect data about ourselves in more intimate ways than our devices currently do, that we need to address that. And it goes a little bit, you know, privacy is sort of one side of that, but also really being able to utilize the massive amounts of information that would greatly improve our health that could come off our clothing. We met with the trainer of one of the professional sports teams in Chicago, and we were talking with the various teams about how they use it, you know, how they use wearable tech. And it brings up issues when you're a professional, you know, an elite athlete like that. So the wearable tech can help you stay healthy because it can see problems. It also, when a contract time comes, you know, that can be a bit challenging. That's, you know, the sort of dystopian side of that. And that's not unusual for all the tech that we're talking about. But what we heard was very interesting to us, is that it's like trying to drink out of a fire hose. There's so much information coming that we haven't figured out how to really turn it into something useful yet. And so I think that while the tech challenges, which are, you know, daunting, but you know, started it on a trajectory with very talented people, like those people on the stage with me, I think that there needs to be a corresponding on probably an AI side, or to start dealing with the data. One of the other things that we heard from the trainer was that people, there isn't personalization yet to that kind of information that's gathered. So you may be getting these kind of readings, which are perfectly great for you, but the trainer has a chart that says this is what should be normal, and they're just not synced up. So he found yet that even that kind of technology in his field wasn't helpful yet. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. So what I heard today is we have some soft, potentially robotics or orthopedics that will pave the next 5 years. Trojan horse of a heated jacket garment, and we still need to figure out the AI personalization intelligence part of the data formula in order to make some of these more intelligent wearables much more practical and useful. So I think we've got a minute left. Maybe we can have one question from the audience. Here you go.
So I'm curious about the security. Oh, sorry. Security and privacy implications. Obviously, some of those textile wearables might not have the compute power that says, some of the more traditional wrist-based wearables might have. So what are some of the things that are being done in order to protect that data? I mean, these things are emitting tons and tons of information.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's the one that nobody likes to talk about when you're inventing a new technology. We always push forward first on what can be done, and then figure out how to manage the output of that. So at the end of the day, you're going to be streaming off into a phone over Bluetooth, and you're going to have the same security vulnerabilities that exist in any Bluetooth device. That is above my pay grade. Simple as that.
So Bluetooth is the
it's a normal go-to. Yeah, it's still the normal go-to. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. We have time for one more last question. Anybody? Oh, back there.
What do you guys think about Apple? It seems like they're talking about their glasses coming out next year or later this year.
They have a number of really fascinating patent filings around wearable tech, not just glasses. I'm really not in a position to comment beyond that. Besides, I think they're moving strongly into textile integration and some really sophisticated looking wearables that are outside the normal form factor.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of their e-textile patents are very interesting. But I think that sometimes wearables fall on, or they're this big cloud with a lot of different raindrops underneath, and the e-textile part of wearables that we live in is very far from the glasses side of wearables.
Yes,
so
typically.
I think that we don't know, or I don't know, but in general, what Apple's doing around filing patents is very exciting because it means that they're starting to invest in the space, but also terrifying because they can patent everything and it leaves little room for other people.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thanks you guys for the wonderful questions. Thanks.